Welcome to the Psych and Business Podcast. We're here to show you how practical psychology can be useful and make your workplace better. I'm Dr. Ernest Wayde. Okay, so the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about listening with your full attention and speaking in a way that makes it easier for people to listen and understand you. So if you're a new leader or manager, these are two great places where practical psychology can help improve your communication with your team, which makes for a better workplace, better teamwork, and greater productivity. Now, as a leader, as a person who is leading others, you can always pretty much count on the fact that not everyone is going to get along. Not everyone is going to agree, and this can result in conflict. In fact, the research says 85% of employees at some point will face conflict, and almost 30% deal with conflict frequently or always. So conflict is a pretty important topic to understand and manage. As a leader, do you know how to deal with conflict? Even if you're not comfortable with it. I mean, a lot of people are not comfortable with conflict, so it should not be surprising that a lot of leaders and managers are not comfortable dealing with conflict. The really important question here is, do you know how to manage your employee conflict? Do you know how to help your employees manage their conflict? Let's get practical. Now, let's stay on the example we used last week, but let's add a little more context to it. So just to remind everyone, you are a new leader in the organization, but it's not just any organization. It's a hospital in a healthcare system. You're leading a department made up of providers and administrative staff. You've gotten pretty good at listening to and understanding what your employees and your team members say to you and what they need from you. And after last week's episode, you've gotten better at talking to your team in a way that makes it easier for them to understand you, which is made for better relationships and communication with your team, leading to increased collaboration and cooperation, improve employee engagement, and better patient satisfaction overall. So a few months go by and you start to hear some grumblings in the team. You start to notice some tension between a couple of team members. And because you don't like conflict, you ignore it, because that's always worked, right? Pretend it's not there and maybe they will just figure it out. Besides, someone else will deal with it. So you leave it and another month goes by and things get worse between the two team members. And it starts to affect the whole team. They don't collaborate or work together as well as they used to. Things are a little bit more dysfunctional. Productivity falls and patient satisfaction decreases. Now, every workplace requires effective teamwork, but perhaps none more so than healthcare. I mean, you're dealing with people's lives here. You need to find a way to manage conflict in a healthy way. A lot of team members start to look at you to step in and manage the conflict. And while you still don't want to, your biggest problem now is that you just don't know how to. How do you step in to manage the conflict between these two team members? You see, while you can't always avoid conflict, you can manage it in a way to minimize the disruption it causes the team. Luckily for you, just like listening and speaking, conflict management is a skill that you can learn. The first part is to acknowledge to yourself that you as a leader are responsible for helping the team to manage the conflict. But you as a person, much like a lot of other people, are uncomfortable with conflict. The rub is managing conflict is part of your job as a leader. So you got to jump in there and have that difficult conversation with these team members. Now, conflict is a psychological construct, often impacted by psychological factors, which all basically means that conflict can be explained from a psychological or human behavior perspective. Let's say, in this case, two people in your team disagree on how to approach some aspect of the work. And while I would love to get into the weeds of what conflict is and the causes, I know you're really just interested in making the conflict go away right now, right? So I'm going to save a deep dive into the conflict for another episode and stay focused on helping you use psychology to make your workplace better. Okay, so back to the problem. The good news for you is that you already have some of the skills you will need to help the team manage the conflict. The first thing you need to do is understand what the conflict is about. The best way to do that is to listen. That's right. active listening. You have to listen with your full attention to try to understand each person's perspective. You basically want to make sure you have a full understanding of what is causing the conflict between these two individuals. So, you set up a meeting with each person and just listen so that you can try to understand. Remember, don't interrupt them. Watch out for those nonverbal cues though. Body language says a lot that people won't or don't say. It's important then to summarize and reflect back to them what you have understood so they can correct you if you've misunderstood anything in what they've said. Now, once you've talked to each person in the conflict, you should have a clear sense of what each person believes is causing the conflict. Now, you may want to agree with one or the other or both or none. You may not take any of their perspectives. You could very well have your own perspective. The important thing here is to remain objective. It's usually not helpful to join one person and gang up on the other. That is not your role as a leader. Now, as a point of clarification here, I want to, of course, say that we're assuming that there isn't a clear and obvious ethical or moral or legal issue where right and wrong is undeniable. I'm assuming, like a lot of conflict, we're dealing with a difference in opinion or an interpersonal issue. So the next step here, after you've spoken to each person, is to get them together. Here you want to make sure that you're using some of those communication skills that you already learned, specifically being clear, concise, direct, and respectful in setting the stage for the conversation between these two people. Set very clear expectations. This may be a difficult and uncomfortable conversation for you, but you have to do it. Start by saying something like, we need to work this out and we need to move past this so we can work effectively as a team and focus on helping our patients. Now, with this kind of statement, you've set the expectations and reminded them both of the common goal that every team member has. Focus on helping the patients. This will also make it a lot easier for everyone involved when we start focusing on a solution and moving towards compromise to resolve the conflict. Essentially, you work to help each person understand the perspective of the other as much as possible, and then work with them to find compromise and move forward on achieving the shared goals of the department. Essentially, you work to help each person understand the perspective of the other person as much as possible, and then work with them both to find compromise and move towards achieving that shared goal, which is in this case, patient care. So the key steps are: seek to understand each involved person's perspective of the conflict, get the conflicting parties together, set clear, concise, direct expectations while reminding them of the common goal, help them to understand each other's perspective as much as possible, and then move towards compromise and resolution. Remember, conflict itself is not a bad thing. It can actually be very helpful to helping a team examine different ideas and land on the best solution if handled constructively and managed appropriately. As the leader, that's your job. Again, I want to remind you, just like active listening and effective communication, conflict management is a skill, and like any other skill, it takes time to practice and to master. By now, you've probably also noticed that your skills are building on themselves and are useful in many situations, like the listening and communication skills coming together for conflict management. So keep practicing and you'll find that you develop a great set of skills that will serve you well throughout your leadership journey. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing and leaving us a review. Feedback is a gift and we love gifts. Thank you for listening. I hope you'll join us again next time.